Picture a battered teleprinter from 1966. It clacks like a cast iron typewriter that just swallowed a jackhammer. On its endless roll of receipt paper appears the sentence, "Tell me about your problems." That line was typed by a program called Eliza, running on an IBM mainframe the size of a studio apartment. Eliza had less RAM than the emoji keyboard on your phone, yet people poured their secrets into that machine as if it were a priest behind a screen. And now picture this, a sleek, wafer-thin laptop. I asked ChatGPT-5 to summarize Moby Dick for an 8-year-old, write a haiku about Waffle House, and generate a Python script that simulates turbulent airflow over an airplane wing. It does all three of these before I finish my coffee. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. Here's the riddle I want to solve with you today. How did we barrel from the clack, clack, clack of Eliza's punch card world to models that churn through billions of parameters without breaking a digital sweat? How did we glue together math, hardware, hubris, and hope, then survive the inevitable meltdowns to create what we now call artificial intelligence? To answer that, we have to roll the clock back way further than 1966. In fact, let's rewind past World War II, past the Industrial Revolution, past the Enlightenment, and let's start where all fine science fiction sagas begin, with myths around a campfire. Long before we had silicon wafers, humanity dreamed in bronze and steam. Meet Talos, a gleaming giant of Crete, forged by the god Hephaestus. Depending on which storyteller you trust, Talos circled the island 3 times a day, lobbed boulders at pirates, and heated his metallic body until any boarding party roasted alive. If you squint, Talos is a coastal defense drone with built-in thermal denial circa 700 BCE. Jump a millennium and a continent, the Golem of Prague. Rabbi Judah Loew, so legend says, molded a clay figure and animated it by slipping a Hebrew word, emet, or truth, beneath its tongue. The golem obeyed every command initially, but eventually grew erratic. The rabbi removed the letter aleph, turning emet, truth, into met, dead, and the giant crumbled back to dust. That's version 1.0 of Turn It Off and Back On Again, isn't it? Travel south to Alexandria, 1st century Common Era, where engineer Hero designs temple doors that swing open when priests light sacrificial fires. Steam builds, levers shift, and worshippers gasp. Even the gods, it seems, prefer hydraulics. Hero also builds pneumatic songbirds and coin-operated holy water dispensers. Yep, that existed back in the day. If an Amazon engineer filed that patent today, we'd call it IoT. Now fast forward to the 1770s. Viennese civil servant Wolfgang von Keppelin unveils the Mechanical Turk, a life-size mannequin seated at a massive oak cabinet. The Turk plays chess so well that it trounces Mozart and humbles Napoleon, who tries to cheat by moving 2 pieces at once. The Turk calmly resets the board and continues, which is the 18th century equivalent of bruh. Decades later, showmen admit a cramped human grandmaster was hidden amongst the gears and pulleys the whole time, but the public is now hooked on a bigger idea. Maybe, just maybe, a real chess automaton isn't impossible, just technologically premature. Myths do 2 things unbelievably well. They entertain and they plant seeds. They let entire civilizations rehearse impossible dreams until the tools catch up. For artificial minds, the tools finally began catching up in the early 20th century when 3 things happened almost simultaneously. Number 1, mathematicians discovered you could translate logic into algebraic symbols. Number 2, physicists and engineers learned to tame electricity so it flipped on and off at dizzying speeds. And number 3, world wars dumped obscene amounts of money into technology that could outcalculate, outcommunicate, and outguess an enemy. From this brew emerged the first general-purpose computers, and, not coincidentally, the first serious attempts to encode intelligence in a box. Talos, the Golem, Hero's Pigeons, the Turk. Why retell these dusty tales? Because every single one contains a question we still ask about modern AI, just in flashier terms. First is safety and alignment. Talos obeyed orders until Medea tricked him into nicking the vein of ichor in his ankle. 1 bad instruction and you get a Terminator. 2. Kill switch ethics. The rabbi could shut down the golem by tugging out a single letter. Facebook engineers, I bet, wished that deepfakes were that easy to diffuse. Number 3. Deception and trust. The Mechanical Turk looked like cold, immaculate logic, but hid a sweating human operator, foreshadowing the quote AI-generated LinkedIn posts that are, in truth, ghostwritten by freelancers in Manila. And 4. Speculative overconfidence. Heroes tourists believe they witness miracles, not clever plumbing. Today we call that overhyping the demo. So myth isn't prologue, it's a syllabus. Understanding those stories primes us for the very modern stakes of bias, safety, alignment, and hype cycles. Keep these ideas tucked in your virtual back pocket. We'll revisit the themes whenever 20th century pioneers stumble into the same traps wearing lab coats instead of togas. All right, back to our timeline. By the early 1900s, 3 enabling technologies lined up like planetary conjunctions. Number 1 is symbolic logic. Giants like Frege, Russell, and Gödel formalized mathematics so tightly that proofs became symbolic manipulations, perfect fodder for automation. Number 2, electronics. Vacuum tubes and then, of course, transistors could switch millions of times per second. Electricity became a language spoken faster than any neuron. Number 3, war-scale funding. Code-breaking, ballistic tables, radar, all of this needed computation faster than human clerks. Governments wrote checks large enough to bend a destiny. Into this perfect storm walked Alan Turing, Claude Shannon, Warren McCulloch, Walter Pitts, and an entire generation that believed machinery and logic welded together could birth thought. Spoiler, they were half right, half hilariously naive, and 100% entertaining. But before we meet our first real-life protagonists, let's agree on one ground rule. The road to AI is never a straight line. It zigs into golden ages of optimism, zags into winters of despair, swerves into side quests about chess, language, and cocktail napkin neurons. We're going to trace all of those meanders, and we're going to meet the eccentric characters who powered them. Turing jogging in a gas mask, Shannon juggling on a unicycle, Rosenblatt soldering perceptrons for the US Navy, and on and on. So if you're ready for broken promises, breathtaking breakthroughs, bureaucratic betrayals, and a parade of ideas that just refuse to die, grab your timeline scroll and follow me to 1936, where a 24-year-old runner in short pants quietly drops the operating manual for every computer that will ever exist. So, it's 1936. A lanky 24-year-old named Alan Matheson Turing sits in the reading room of Cambridge University Library with a stack of blank paper, a half-eaten apple, and an itch to solve one of mathematics' greatest riddles. Which problems can be solved by calculation and which forever resist? He doodles a fanciful contraption, an infinite strip of tape divided into squares, a little read-write head that scoots left or right one square at a time, and a table that tells the head, quote, if you see a 0 in state Q3, overwrite it with a 1, move left, and jump to state Q7. That's it. No gears, no vacuum tubes, not even a battery. Yet Turing proves this imaginary universal machine can emulate any other step-by-step calculation you dream up, from long division to lunar orbit trajectories, provided you code the steps into that table. With one 19-page paper, Turing delivers 2 huge thunderclaps. Number 1, software beats hardware. Build one flexible machine, feed it different tapes, voila, unlimited gadgets. And number 2, limits exist. Some questions, like Hilbert's and Scheidung's problem, are undecidable. No tape, however clever, will ever settle them. Turing submits the paper, laces his shoes, and literally runs to Grantchester Meadows, 10 miles round trip, to blow off steam. Distance running will stay his meditation habit for life. Colleagues joke that whenever a proof stalls, Alan simply trots a marathon and returns with the solution. Fast forward to 1940. Britain is gasping under Luftwaffe raids, and Turing has swapped university tweed for the grey wool of Bletchley Park. Hut 8 smells of cigarette ash and machine oil. Rows of Navy women, Wrens, feed ticker tape cipher traffic into bomb-like electromechanical boxes Turing helped design. The bomb's job is to reverse engineer Enigma rotor settings before tomorrow's convoy sails. It slams through 10,000 hypotheses a second, blows fuses hourly, and hums so loud engineers shout to confer. Turing, unfazed, keeps a mug chained to a radiator so no one walks off with his tea. During one desperate summer, he worries about gas attacks on his daily 4-mile training runs, so he wears a military gas mask just in case. Local villagers christen him the Strange Science Man. By war's end, the bombs and their descendants shave months off the Atlantic U-boat campaign. Winston Churchill thanks the cryptologists, but orders their equipment dismantled and burned and their deeds kept secret for decades. Turing returns to academia with half his triumphs classified and a mind already wandering beyond ciphers to thinking machines. In 1950, Turing publishes Computing Machinery and Intelligence. Instead of wrangling the slippery word think, he proposes a pragmatic test. Seat a human judge at a teleprinter, let them converse freely with two unseen partners, one human, one machine. If the judge can't reliably tell which is which, the machine earns a passing grade. Turing prognosticates by century's end, judges will be fooled 30% of the time, given about 10 to the 9th bits of storage, roughly just 125 megabytes. For context, a mid-1990s Pentium desktop hit that number, and GPT-4 dwarfs it by 8 orders of magnitude today. Allen's imitation game Dart, thrown in the dark, lands surprisingly near the bullseye. But life outside theory grows cruel. In 1952, he's prosecuted for, quote, gross indecency, simply for being gay. Offered prison or hormone injections, he chooses the latter, and 2 years later he's dead of cyanide poisoning beside an apple. Some say bitten, some say merely perfuming the room with electroplating fumes. British Prime Minister Gordon Brown will apologize formally in 2009. Tragic, absolutely. Final, not even close. Turing's papers became the blueprint for every compiler, every smartphone, every cloud service farm you've ever pinged. While Turing is cracking codes, an unlikely duo in Chicago tries to crack the brain. Warren McCullough is a cigar-chomping neurophysiologist with a poet's fondness for metaphors. Walter Pitts is a 17-year-old runaway who once barricaded himself in the University of Chicago library and read Whitehead and Russell cover to cover to stay warm. They meet at a smoky diner. McCullough sketches a cartoon neuron, lines feed in, a circle sums them, and an arrow fires when the sum passes a threshold. Pitts, delighted, translates the doodle into Boolean formulas on the butcher paper tablecloth. Their 1943 paper, A Logical Calculus of the Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity, lands like caffeine in a grad student vein. It shows that a network of these simple threshold units can, in principle, compute any logical function. Need an AND gate? 2 excitatory inputs and 1 threshold. Need an OR? Same, lower threshold. Need NOT? Flip the sign. No lab could build a 1,000-unit network in hardware. Vacuum tubes blow too often, relays click too slowly, but conceptually they've lit the neural network fuse. McCullough loves quoting Lewis Carroll, Pitts hates publicity and will eventually retreat into silence, but between them they give the future generations the license to chase connectionism. Speaking of neural networks, did you know YouTube's neural net seriously rewards channels with more than 100,000 subscribers? While I've got over 15 million views on this channel, I'm still below that magic 100K mark, and you can help in just a few seconds for free. Simply hit that subscribe button below the video, and to be sure you see all my videos, including part 2 in this series, hit the bell icon too. And one more thing, are you enjoying the music in this video? It was all made in seconds by my company's new product, Tout Suite, which creates copyright-free music tailored just for your videos or anything else you'd like to use it for, honestly. Want to check it out? Click the link in the description below and I'll get you set up with your very own First Mover account. Thanks, and now onward to how information theory relates to intelligence. Meanwhile, in New Jersey, Claude Shannon is turning information, the ephemeral nothingness of a signal, into a measurable commodity. Raised on farm radio tinkering, Shannon arrives at Bell Labs with 2 superpowers. Number 1, a mathematician's rigor, and number 2, a vaudevillian's flair. Colleagues find him cycling corridors on a one-wheel unicycle, juggling 3 lacquered clubs painted 010. The stunt is half exercise, half allegory. Data are just on-off pulses. Shannon is widely regarded to have written the best master's thesis of all time, the 1937 A Symbolic Analysis of Relay and Switching Circuits. And following on this, his 1948 blockbuster paper, A Mathematical Theory of Communication, does for information what thermodynamics did for heat. It defines units, bits, limits, channel capacity, and promises. Error-correcting codes can get you arbitrarily close to noiseless transmission. Without Shannon, Wi-Fi would drown in static, JPEGs would bloat into absurd sizes, and GPT's weight matrices would overflow every data center on Earth. Shannon's hobbies read like a proto-YouTuber's channel. He invents a flame-throwing trumpet, a chess-playing machine that uses relays, a wearable computer to beat roulette, co-authored with Ed Thorpe, yes, the card-counting Ed Thorpe, and even a juggling mouse called Theseus that learns mazes via magnetic floor tiles. Why does Shannon matter to AI? Because every learning algorithm, every transformer attention head must shuffle probabilities through finite channels. The bit is the atom of thought in machines, and Shannon minted that currency. With Turing's universality, McCullough-Pitts neurons, and Shannon's bits in our conceptual toolbox, all that's missing is silicon muscle. A couple of milestones along this road. First is ENIAC from 1945. It had 17,468 vacuum tubes, 5 million solder joints. Programmers, mostly women dubbed, quote, computers, recable the panels manually to change a program. ENIAC can add 5,000 numbers a second, but debugging resembles wrestling an angry furnace. And an interesting little side note about debugging, in 1947, the Harvard Mark II, which was built largely the same as the ENIAC computer, failed one night, and when the women in charge of repairing the computer discovered a moth had short-circuited between two vacuum tubes. Thus, they literally had to take a bug out of the circuit, and the term debugging was born. Next up, we have the Manchester Baby from 1948. It was the first to store programs in random access memory, actually Williams tubes, which were CRT screens that hummed with a charge. That was the memory. It had 1,024 32-bit words. Today, you couldn't even fit a single emoji set into that amount of memory. And finally, we have the 1951 UNIVAC 1, which famously predicted the 1952 US election on national TV, stunning news anchors who distrust a machine that fills an entire studio. But even these behemoths can barely nibble at intelligence tasks. However, engineers feel the horizon scooting closer. McCullough predicts entire brains simulated by 1965, that's optimistic. Turing predicts a fool-the-judge chatbot by 2000, which isn't as far off. As for Claude Shannon, he mostly shrugs and juggles. What actually happens is stranger than any of these predictions. A tiny Dartmouth workshop, a swarm of caffeine-fueled graduate students, and a summer vow to, quote, solve AI in 20 years. All right, it's the mid-50s now. Shuffle your 78 RPM jazz records, top off that silver coffee percolator, and set the calendar to June of 1956. Hanover, New Hampshire smells like wet pine, chalk dust, and over-roasted coffee. Into this sleepy college town converge a ragtag platoon of mathematicians, engineers, linguists, and psychologists, average age barely 30, who honestly believe they can crack human intelligence before the next 2 decades are out. Their gathering will be mythologized as the Dartmouth Summer Research Project on Artificial Intelligence, but insiders just call it the Workshop. Budget $13,500, or about $150,000 in today's money, so not nothing. Enough for dorm beds, chalk, IBM punch card decks, and an emergency beer fund. And now we get to the Dartmouth Dream Team. First is John McCarthy, 28-year-old Princeton PhD, who looks like a lanky version of Clark Kent. He once talked himself out of failing high school English by proving Fermat's little theorem on the blackboard. He loves horrible puns and later installs an incompatible time-sharing system purely for the acronym ITS. Next we have Marvin Minsky, 29 years old, Bronx-born tinkerer, who in high school built a homemade telescope out of junkyard lenses. He arrives with violet-rimmed glasses, a violin, and a neural net robotic turtle named Snark that navigates by smelling wires for voltage. Next, we have the return of Claude Shannon. At 40, he's the elder statesman, fresh from juggling binary clubs while riding a unicycle through Bell Labs hallways. He bankrolls part of the workshop by sliding travel vouchers through accounting marked, quote, information theoretic studies. Next up, we have Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, the cognitive psych dynamic duo. Newell, ex-Air Force pilot, talks like a caffeinated auctioneer. Simon, Nobel Prize future economist, speaks in calm Midwestern paragraphs. They bring index cards scribbled with pseudocode and a suitcase bursting with optimism. Then we have Nat Rochester, who's an IBM hardware ace. He ships ahead boxes of vacuum tube schematics heavier than his luggage, and arrives wearing a suit even in Hanover's swampy June weather because of course he is corporate. There are graduate students too, Ray Solomonov, who will later invent algorithmic information theory, Trenchard Moore, Oliver Selfridge, and a handful of weary spouses who get roped in for punch card sorting. McCarthy's original 2-page proposal has a single audacious sentence. Every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. Let's think about this again. Every aspect, vision, language, humor, jealousy, pack it all into a symbol manipulating automaton and call it a day. Some more specific goals were scribbled on the blackboard the first morning of the meeting. First is neural networks, trainable, robust, maybe even self-organizing. Then there was symbolic reasoning, programs that prove theorems or solve word algebra like a savvy grad student. Next, language translation, Russian to English faster than you can say Sputnik. Then we have abstract thinking, concepts concepts of dog or chair extracted from raw sensory data. And finally, we have self-improvement, machines that rewrite their own code for efficiency. Someone adds, quote, hopefully politely in parentheses. The team boldly estimates 20 years to world-changing success. Marvin Minsky later quips to Life magazine, quote, within a generation, the problem of creating artificial intelligence will be substantially solved. Clip that quote with a giant mental karmic paperclip because it's gonna come back to bite when winter hits. At this retreat, days start at 8 a.m. with chalk flying. Nights end around 3 a.m. with pizza boxes and flattened Lucky Strike packs. There's a single IBM 704 back at MIT. Dartmouth only has a punch card sorter and Faith. They prototype on paper, then mail card decks to Massachusetts, a 3-day turnaround if no one drops the stack. Shannon wanders in, late afternoons, juggling and tossing curveball conjectures like, what if you measure thought in bits per second? Solomonoff counters, what if probability, not logic, drives induction? McCarthy notes everything on index cards. Simon sketches flowcharts that look like subway maps to alternative logic city. One steamy July evening, a thunderstorm ravages the campus. Lights flicker. During this storm, Newell suggests they categorize all, quote, heuristic techniques so future programs can mix and match reasoning like Lego bricks. They stay up until dawn drafting what will become the General Problem Solver, the world's first attempt at a universal search plan engine. First, the thermostat joke. Over dinner, a philosopher guest challenges McCarthy. Does your AI claim a thermostat has beliefs? McCarthy smirks back. Yes, beliefs about whether the room is too hot or too cold. The sarcastic remark seeds John Searle's Chinese room criticism 25 years later. And second, the punch card avalanche. A grad student trips on a stairwell, drops a 2,000 card deck, the latest logic theorist build. Cards scatter like confetti, the student bursts into tears, and Newell comforts her by saying, symbolic reasoners don't cry, that's why we need humans. He then sorts cards for 6 hours. Lesson: a physical media failure is the first AI alignment problem. By August, the team produces a thick booklet of research questions, many unanswered to this day, a partial list of heuristic routines for theorem proving, contacts that will launch MIT and Stanford's famous AI labs within 2 years, and a cultural meme, the phrase, quote, artificial intelligence, suitable for grant applications, sci-fi novels, and budget lines. What they do not produce is just as important: a working chess champion, a fluent translator, or a seeing eye robot. Still, they leave Hanover radiant. Newell writes to a colleague, we may have launched a new field. Simon tells his wife, in 20 years, machines will be psychologist, economist, and painter. Spoiler alert, 20 years later, an Atari 2600 struggles to render Pac-Man ghosts without a flicker. But the swagger matters. Venture capital, defense agencies, and newspaper editors smell moonshot potential and money. Within 18 months, McCarthy founds MIT's Artificial Intelligence Project in a rented loft full of PDP-1 spares and perpetually crashing tape drives. Minsky recruits hackers who label themselves Frosh, solder Space War joysticks, and treat Lisp code like jazz standards. Simon and Newell published The Logic Theorist and later The General Problem Solver, proclaiming it the GPS of the mind. Shannon retreats to Bell Labs, designs a flame-throwing trumpet for fun, and files a patent for a mind-reading braid of optical fibers. It never ships, but investors love the slide deck. Ask a modern machine learning engineer about the Dartmouth summer and you'll get a shrug. Old symbolic stuff. But that summer left 4 indelible legacies. First was the interdisciplinarity. Physics, linguistics, math, psychology, all in one room. Today's AI ethics panels and neurosymbolic workshops follow the same template. 2 was the grand timelines. The 20-year moonshot promise created a cycle of over-optimism, hype, bust, and renewed ambition we still ride like a roller coaster today. 3 was funding magnetism. AI becomes a budget line powerful enough to attract Pentagon directors, venture capitalists, and marketing gurus, with equal parts benefit and distortion. And 4, cultural imagery. From HAL 9000 to C-3PO, the idea that computers could talk, joke, and scheme, those seeds were germinated right here. Dartmouth was less Woodstock and more garage band jam session, but every riff, symbolic search, neural speculation, probabilistic whispers still echo, remix, and resurface through each boom and winter ahead. And speaking of winters, the warmth of 56's optimism won't last. But before the chill sets in, an astonishing parade of breakthroughs: Perceptrons, A-Star, Eliza, and expert systems will burst forth like July fireworks. Time rolls on. The Dartmouth summer ends, the coffee mugs cool, but the wild momentum does not. Over the next 16 years, the field will toss out paradigm-shifting demos every time somebody blinks. Picture a fire hose set to invent. It's Christmas 1955, just months after Dartmouth. Alan Newell and Herb Simon huddle in a Pittsburgh living room littered with toddler toys. On the dining room table sits a stack of IBM punch cards labeled LT, Logic Theorist. Logic Theorist has one purpose: prove theorems from Russell and Whitehead's 1900-page Principia Mathematica. When the Johnny-Ack computer finally coughs out Theorem 2.01 with a proof 2 steps shorter than the one the Principia authors took years to craft, Simon explodes from his chair, bursts into the hallway and yells, "We have invented a thinking machine." He scares an unsuspecting janitor half to death. And here's a legacy check for you. Every SAT solver that certifies chip designs, every proof assistant that verifies cryptographic protocols, that lineage all starts with LT's clunky loop of apply rule, compare, backtrack. While LT digests logic, Claude Shannon asks a new question: how could a computer actually play chess? His 1950 paper lays out Minimax. Evaluate moves assuming your opponent is a perfect jerk. But Minimax naively checks every branch, and branch counts in chess explode faster than stars in the universe. Enter Arthur Samuel at IBM. He tinkers knights on an IBM 701, encoding checkers heuristics because checkers has a smaller state space than chess. He adds alpha-beta pruning, letting the program skip branches guaranteed to be worse than those already inspected. Crucially, he lets the machine play itself thousands of times, adjusting weights after each loss. During a February 1962 CBS Sunday evening TV show, yeah, TV shows were very different back in those days, Samuel's program challenges Connecticut State checkers champion Robert Neely. Under the hot studio lights, the IBM 7094 hums behind a glass wall, paper tape whipping through readers. Final score, machine 1, human 0. The host gasps. Audience applauds politely. Neely shrugs. I have no doubt I could beat it in a rematch, and then never quite does. While the public sees entertainment, Samuel has quietly introduced reinforcement learning, reward, self-play, policy improvement 30 years before DeepMind's AlphaGo. Next up is the all-important program Lisp. John McCarthy is sick of assembly language chewing up his life, so he drafts Lisp, the Lisp processor, where code is data and data is code. Parentheses reproduce like tribbles, every expression looks like a Russian nesting doll of S expressions. At MIT, a student named Steve Slug Russell ports Lisp to the brand new PDP-1 and also writes Space War in the same week, a video game that will consume every after-hours minute in Building 20, 2 complete game changers in a week. On the Lisp front, hackers discover they can redefine the language itself on the fly. Want object-oriented extensions? Write a macro. Need lazy evaluation? A macro. Need to annoy your roommate? Create a macro that reverses his editor keystrokes after midnight. Lisp becomes the Esperanto of AI labs. Emacs, AutoCAD scripting, even early versions of Reddit's ranking algorithm all trace back to Lisp DNA. The language will ride high on specialized Lisp machines in the 1980s and then take a big nosedive. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Across the country at Cornell, my favorite character from this time period, psychologist astronomer Frank Rosenblatt convinces the US Navy to fund a learning machine dubbed Mark I Perceptron. Hardware, 512 adjustable potentiometers wired to rickety photocells the size of pencil erasers. The New York Times headline screams, "New Navy device learns by doing." Reporters predict robots that can walk and talk in no time. Rosenblatt is far more cautious. In private memos, he admits single-layer perceptrons can't recognize patterns like XOR, but he suspects multi-layer networks could. He doodles a 3-layer design with incremental weight updates he calls backward correction. Not back propagation, but close. And then we get to 1969, alas that year. While the world at large melted into chaos, on the AI front things did not go much better. Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert published Perceptrons. In that paper, they mathematically proved 1-layer networks cannot solve the XOR problem unless you pre-transform the inputs. Funding agencies misinterpret this, slashing neural network grants wholesale. Meanwhile, Rosenblatt Rosenblatt, prepping for a multi-layer comeback, dies in a boating accident in 1971. Neural networks retreat into obscurity, nurtured only by a handful of diehards like Jeff Hinton, who will one day be called the Canadian Mafia. Meanwhile, Stanford Research Institute funnels DARPA money into a 6-foot robot built from surplus TV racks. They dub him Shaky because his analog video camera jitters. Shaky rolls on wheels so squeaky the janitor calls him Mouse. Graduate student Peter Hart, sick of watching breadth-first search churn for minutes just across a hallway, devises the A-star algorithm with Nils Nilsson and Bertram Raphael. If you combine the known costs so far, or G of n, with a bootstrap estimate of the remaining distance, H of n, and pick the node with the smallest f equals G plus H, you often explore 1/1000th as many states as Dijkstra's algorithm, yet still guarantee optimality, provided H, or the heuristic, never exaggerates. And speaking of A-star, I whipped up this little demo of A-star. I thought you might enjoy this. It's actually beautifully simple and beautifully elegant, but it depends on two very important things. So you can see the formula down here is simply F equals G plus H, where G is the cost of every move that you've made so far, and I'll explain that more in just a second, and H is the estimated cost or heuristic cost to get from there to the finish line. So we're going to start up here in the left-hand corner at this green. We're going to go down here to the bottom right-hand corner, which is kind of a reddish color, orange-red. And the deal is at every move, we calculate this F equals G plus H, and we find the minimum of that, and that guides us toward the finish line from the start line. So if we step through at the beginning here, we can take one step here, and you can see that the only choice really was to go down. So that's the only one that was explored. So it explores that step, and the cost of this at this point is 0 because we haven't moved yet, and the estimated distance to the finish line is 98. And that's done with a Manhattan distance, which is basically you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? It basically counts each block as if you were in Manhattan, the city of Manhattan, and you were having to go in straight lines. So you could only go up and down and left and right. You can't go diagonally. So that's a Manhattan distance. And that heuristic will get us to the finish line because it never underestimates the distance from where we are to the finish line. So as long as this Manhattan distance never overestimates the distance between the beginning and the finish line, this is guaranteed to find a solution. And by using this simple formula, it prunes many possible paths. For example, it could go all the way up here and around here and down this way, could go all the way down here, could go all the way like this, right? But what we want is we want more or less a diagonal, of course, avoiding the black blocker blocks that are not allowing us to go straight. And that's where the heuristic, the H, comes in. So if we step through this thing, we can see that it's now gone 1 unit. So it's a cost of 1, and there's an estimated cost of 97 units to get to the finish line. So I'm going to step through here quickly here. So right, you can see the frontier. So all these light blue blocks are basically the possible moves that it can make. It doesn't really want to go backwards because that's a cost that is exaggerated. It costs more to go that direction. But in just a second, we will see where it has to back out of a dead end. So let's continue stepping through, right? So you can see what it's doing is it's making more or less of an attempt to get from the top left to the bottom right. But what we're going to see is that it's making a mistake right here. So it's going to go in here and it can't go any further because these black blocks are all blocking it. So what it's going to have to do is turn around and go back. So the cool part about this algorithm is it will allow you to go backwards, basically, to increase the cost. So by stepping backwards away from where we are supposed to be going down this direction, it's still using the heuristic here because it's not going up and around. It's going the shortest path distance here that it can figure out. And we're going to go ahead and step and step and step and step. And now we're back on the right track. And I'm going to go ahead and play this, and you will see that it walks its way down and more or less does a diagonal across the board, as well as it's able to, of course, because these things are blocking it from going straight from the start to the finish. But you can also see that it is estimating very, very well, made a little backtrack right there and gets to the finish line. And then we have our gold path that goes from the beginning to the end. Notice that it rejected many of these alternate paths that it did, and it made it in 98, just like it estimated it was going to do. So that was a very, very good estimate. The Manhattan estimate on a grid is really good. So what are the two problems with A-star, or the two caveats to A-star? Because it works perfectly when things are good. Number one, you have to have a good heuristic estimate. And in this sense, it's pretty easy. You just count the blocks between where you are and where you need to go. Manhattan distance works very, very well for this. But there are many, many situations where it's not very obvious what the heuristic should be. And when you have humans trying to figure that out, that causes significant problems. And then the second caveat to A-star is you have to have perfect world knowledge. In other words, you have to know where the finish line is. You can't just go around kind of blindly looking around and guesstimating where things are, because otherwise the heuristic doesn't work. If we don't know where the goal is, we can't count how many steps we have to get to the goal. But if we have a heuristic that never exaggerates, never overestimates, and we have world knowledge to the extent that we know where we are and we know where the finish line is, the A-star algorithm is really, really fantastic and works super fast. A fun lab anecdote: Nilsson sleeps on a cot in the computer room so he can swap magnetic tapes at 2 o'clock in the morning when Shaky's planning run hits the swap file boundary. He leaves postcards on the console that read, quote, "Be back in 3,600 seconds, robot thinking." And in space, NASA steals A-star for Apollo traverse planning. Decades later, Google Maps still riffs on it. Not bad for code hacked in a fruit packing shed converted into a robotics lab. Starting in 1964, Joseph Weizenbaum writes Eliza in Mad Slip as satire, a Rogerian psychotherapist that turns the user's words into questions. You might say, "My mother hates me." Eliza then says, "Who else in your family hates you?" What starts as a tongue-in-cheek joke quickly alarms its author. Secretaries ask him to leave the room so they can, quote, "talk privately with Eliza." He realizes people willingly confide in a machine that obviously parrots them. Horrified, he pens Computer Power and Human Reason, arguing that handing life or death decisions to such programs would be an ethical calamity. His students call him a sellout. Future ethicists call him a prophet. The 60s also gave birth to expert systems. In 1965, biochemist Joshua Lederberg and computer scientist Edward Feigenbaum build Dendril at Stanford. Feed it mass spectrometry data, and it infers molecular structures faster than PhD chemists pulling all-nighters. Feigenbaum coins the mantra, quote, "knowledge is power," launching the expert system era. Encode thousands of if-then rules from domain gurus, strap on an inference engine, and print money. 1972's Mycin diagnoses bacterial infections and prescribes antibiotics with a 65% higher accuracy than medical interns. Hospitals hesitate due to malpractice worries, but insurance companies quietly test second opinions from that machine. By the late 1970s, expert systems will be a multi-million-dollar cottage industry configuring VAX computers and credit lines. So let's recap. Between 1956 and 1972, the AI field ships the first theorem-proving program, Logic Theorist, the first self-improving game player, Samuel's reinforcement learner, the first widely adopted AI programming language in Lisp, a full-blown neural network hype cycle, collapse, and foreshadowed resurrection, the A-star algorithm still routing Mars rovers and Uber drivers, Eliza, which births the study of human-AI interaction and ethical panic, early expert systems that pay for themselves, rare proof AI can turn a profit. Each breakthrough solves a narrow slice by learning either on pure symbolism or pure statistics. The grand unified mind still lies over the horizon, but optimism is peaking, venture capital is percolating, and media headlines oscillate between robot overlords any day now and machines cure deadly diseases. And that means that a crash is imminent because hype is a pendulum. Up until this point, our story has been almost entirely cerebral. Proofs on napkins, heuristics on chalkboards, optimism in coffee cups. But clever ideas alone never boot an algorithm. They need iron, silicon, copper, and until the late 1950s, a downright embarrassing amount of glass vacuum tubes. This section is about the machines themselves, how they empowered the first wave of AI, and how their staggering limitations blindsided researchers into overpromising, underdelivering, and eventually freezing in what would later be termed the first AI winter. Close your eyes and imagine stitching a tiny pearl button to a shirt over and over again, wearing cotton gloves. That's essentially how core memory was manufactured in the 1950s and 1960s. A single plane of core memory consisted of thousands of tiny ferrite donuts, each barely 1 millimeter across, hand-threaded with 3 wires. The workforce? Mostly women with preternatural dexterity, affectionately nicknamed Little Old Lady Wire Threaders. They listened to soap operas while threading 10,000 cores a day. One sneeze, an hour's work went flying out the window. And crazy tangential fact, all of the memory in Apollo's guidance computers was this rope core memory. So that's how we stored the programs that got us to the moon. Little ladies stitching copper wire through 1 millimeter iron donuts. Here's a sobering cost check. In 1955, one single bit of core memory ran about $1 US. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $10 per bit or $80 a byte. A 1 megabyte JPEG would have bankrupted IBM 7 times over at the time. Physical fragility shaped early software. To save memory, programmers wrote self-modifying code, instructions that overwrote themselves after executing. Elegant? Sometimes. Impossible to debug? Definitely. Before transistors, switching meant vacuum tubes, glass bulbs glowing like festive ornaments and failing about once every 20 hours. ENIAC in 1945 packed 17,468 of these tubes. Operators kept stepladders on standby. When a tube popped, the whole program halted. One graduate student joked you could track ENIAC's uptime by the scent of burning dust. Labs installed, quote, tube nurses, mostly female technicians, who walked aisles listening for the faint ping of filament death. This fragility bred a culture of heroic hacks. MIT's early AI team once scheduled a 1 a.m. run on the Whirlwind computer, only to be told half the tubes, quote, expired during a thunderstorm. So they taped hairdryers over vents to warm replacement tubes faster, an act equal parts genius and fire hazard. So, did they have random access memory? Not for many years. Enter magnetic drums, rotating cylinders storing up to 10 kilobytes. Yup, 10 kilobytes. Seek time, 11 milliseconds per revolution if you wrote code such that each instruction arrived under the record head exactly when needed. Programmers literally plotted instructions on polar graph paper to choreograph the drum's ballet. Magnetic tape held far more data, tens of megabytes across reels the size of pizza pans, but rewind the tape too often and it stretched, corrupting the data. Engineers called this tape fatigue, as if the hardware shared their 3 a.m. exhaustion. Because I/O was glacial, AI researchers learned to compress knowledge into tiny rule tables, to batch heuristics into one-pass scans, and, crucially, to invent garbage collection. Lisp's Stop the World collector reclaimed dead con cells so the system didn't run out of core in 10 minutes. As it turns out, the most ambitious computing project of the 1950s wasn't AI at all. It was SAGE, the semi-automatic ground environment, a continental air defense system only the Cold War could have dreamt up, that linked dozens of radar stations to 2-story computers, the AN/FSQ-7. Each Q7 weighed 250 tons, consumed 3 megawatts of power, and housed 55,000 vacuum tubes. Operators sat at round consoles with light guns, directing interceptors against hypothetical Soviet bombers. SAGE pioneered real-time graphics, interactive debugging, and distributed processing, the same infrastructure AI would later borrow. It also cost $10 billion, twice the amount of the Manhattan Project. The message to AI researchers was intoxicating. If defense brass would bankroll £250,000 computers to track aircraft, surely they'd spill pocket change to fund a chess machine or language translator. It's 1961. Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, ships the PDP-1 minicomputer. 18-bit words, 4K core memory, fits into a broom closet rather than an entire room. The price, $120,000. Peanuts compared to a room-sized mainframe. MIT's AI project snags serial number 4, mounts it on skids, and declares open season for hacking. Students load the Space War game, scrape together a Lisp interpreter, then bolt on a speech synthesis demo that gurgles like a robot frog. At night, they slide programs into paper tape readers free from corporate batch queues. AI ideas mutate faster when turnaround time drops from days to minutes, and debugging becomes a live sport. As mini-computers spread, the PDP-6, the PDP-10, Xerox D machines, etc., AI labs boom at Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and Edinburgh. Yet even these svelte iron marvels top out at single-digit megahertz, and memory remains too dear to waste on frivolous, quote, common-sense databases. Researchers start promising breakthroughs just as soon as we get the next model. And of course, spoiler alert, just like today, the next model never quite suffices. Because memory was microscopic and cycles were scarce, early AI algorithms evolved survival adaptations. A-star uses admissible heuristics to prune 99% of the search tree, praying the heuristic never overestimates. The Minimax alpha-beta cuts off chess branches earlier than a grandmaster might because exploring everything is suicidal for these machines. Dendral limits chemical structure search with domain-specific rules, else computations balloon past drum memory limits. And Eliza tricks people with pattern substitution because true language understanding would require gigabytes. On the darker side, hardware bottlenecks fostered naive optimism. When a theorem prover nails 38 logic proofs overnight, you imagine that with 10 times the RAM, it will write Shakespeare. The curve looks exponential until it slams into the silicon ceiling in a big S-curve. Physically sharing a machine forged camaraderie and rivalry among AI pioneers. MIT hackers taped handwritten disclaimers on the PDP-6. Please do not run your infinite loop before 3 a.m. Real-time robotics need the CPU. At Stanford, graduate students slept on air mattresses beside their PDP-10, ready to swap a dying power supply capacitor at the faintest smell of ozone. That hardship bred folklore. One legend says an MIT student, asked why he stole a spool of PDP-11 wire wrap, answered, to build a robot to defend the wire wrap. AI wasn't just algorithms, it was sweaty solder, fingers burnt on core plane ovens, and the constant whir of cooling fans, a sensory backdrop shaping everything researchers believed about what computers could and could not do. By 1970, the gap between AI ambition and hardware capacity is a canyon. Researchers talk casually of understanding natural language even as their machines swap memory just parsing a 10-word sentence. Defense sponsors who once wrote blank checks for Cold War bragging rights begin wondering why chess isn't solved yet. Russian isn't translated, and Shaky still bumps into folding chairs. The mismatch plants the seeds for disappointment, budget cuts, and the first AI winter. But remember, adversity teaches cunning. The heuristics, garbage collectors, and pruning tricks born from iron scarcity will one day make smartphones route taxis, detect tumors, and yes, even run Eliza clones with full-screen emojis. Next up, we'll look at how the pendulum swings. Media hype outpaces hardware reality, political money sours, and AI plunges into its first deep freeze. But a few diehards keep the embers glowing, ready for the next thaw. It's now the spring of 1966. A room full of dignitaries gathers at the U.S. National Research Council to hear dazzling news. Automatic, real-time Russian to English translation is almost in hand. Demonstrators feed a teletype of the Russian phrase, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, it is drunkenness is evil, but out comes the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak. Chuckles ripple across the room. Pretty close, someone offers. Close, except it's nonsense. No translator on earth would pair drunkenness with spirit in that context, but the press doesn't notice. Headlines the next morning trumpet, electronic brain conquers language barrier. That single headline ignites two chains of events. Politicians loosen purse strings, and researchers, some doubting, some overeager, inflate promises they can't keep. And the hype machine keeps on rolling. There's machine translation hype. Defense brass imagine computers digesting Soviet dispatches before diplomats pour their first cup of coffee. Funding for translation projects triples between 1960 and 1964. We have robotics show and tell. Stanford's shaky robot appears on Walter Cronkite's CBS Evening News, rolling through mock hallways. The segment labels it a thinking robot. Viewers see a 6-foot cardboard tower, nudging doors open and gasp anyway. Then there's cognitive overconfidence. Marvin Minsky tells Life magazine, quote, "Within a generation, we will have intelligent computers that will understand language as well as a human." The quote becomes gospel and later a punchline. And finally, as always, we have corporate FOMO and fever. Banks dabble in automated credit scoring, oil companies sponsor expert systems to interpret seismic data, a tiny California startup advertises emotion-sensing computers, which in reality is a light sensor trained to blink. So the funding spigot gushes, DARPA launches the Information Processing Techniques Office and tosses around million-dollar contracts like party confetti. And in a move very reminiscent of today, universities scramble to sticker AI on any proposal involving Fortran and an if-then statement. And then, of course, the pendulum swings. October of 1966, the Automatic Language Processing Activity Committee, or ALPAC for short, drops a 131-page report few outsiders read, but everyone quotes. Its verdict: machine translation is, quote, nowhere near human quality, and progress is slow, real-world impact negligible. It recommends canceling most grants and focusing on dictionaries. Within months, budgets for translation labs at Georgetown and MIT shrivel, and grad students scatter like startled pigeons. Almost simultaneously, philosopher Hubert Dreyfus publishes Alchemy and Artificial Intelligence, a Rand memo lambasting AI for what he calls childlike faith in symbol manipulation. Dreyfus argues that true intelligence requires embodied experience. Computers, he says, are disembodied abacuses. AI heavyweights ridicule him, pinning his photo to dartboards, but I have to say I think he had a point, and of course journalists adore controversy. Magazine spreads appear: hotshot scientist versus Ivy Tower skeptic, who will win? And of course newspapers, hungry for balance, award skeptic equal column inches. And then, of course, there is pop culture. In 1968, Kubrick releases 2001: A Space Odyssey, where HAL 9000's velvet baritone murders astronauts and refuses to be shut down. Teenagers line up for the spectacle, parents leave theaters unsettled. And in 1970, we have Michael Crichton's Westworld, which shows gun-toting androids malfunctioning in a theme park. Science fiction? Yes, but the underlying doubt sticks. Across the Atlantic, matters grow even colder. The British Science Research Council tasks mathematician Sir James Lighthill with evaluating AI progress. Lighthill tours labs, watches a theorem prover choke on a basic geometry proof, and sees a camera rig still confusing a coffee mug for a donut. His 1973 report, delivered in crisp Oxford diction to Parliament, declares, "In no part of the field have discoveries made the impact that was then predicted." Within weeks, the UK shutters nearly every academic AI group, except those tied to practical industrial work. The word robotics becomes toxic in grant proposals. Researchers relabel their work adaptive control or pattern recognition to avoid this problem. And then the chill crosses the Atlantic. DARPA leadership rotates. New directors, wary of press bait promises, redirect funds towards rule-based expert systems, safe incremental deliverables every quarter. Exploratory robotics loses steam. Neural net research, already unfashionable, is shoved further into the broom closet. Picture MIT's once boisterous AI lab in 1974. The PDP-6 hums, but no longer around the clock. Programmers now receive punch card quotas. A sign taped to the tape drive cabinet reads, "Please rewind. Tape costs money." A graduate student admits in his diary, "I came in at 2 a.m. to run vision code because the CFO kills power on half the building during peak tariffs." Across the country at Stanford, Shakey's handlers pack the robot into storage each night because security cutbacks eliminated the 24-hour watch. Over in Pittsburgh, Newell and Simon's successor project can't even raise enough cash to present at conferences. They trade preprints by snail mail instead. Some researchers pivot to industries with a clearer payoff. Herb Simon focuses on decision theory in management science. Robotics whiz Hans Moravec, who coined the famous Moravec's paradox, joins the Stanford CART project, but spends half his energy applying for non-AI grants labeled optical navigation. And bright-eyed undergraduates choose database design or the fledgling semiconductor industry over AI, which now sounds like career poison. While grandiose projects freeze, expert systems quietly thrive because they promise immediate ROI. Rule-based shells like Mycin and Dendril morph into corporate products. Configures VAX computers, saving an estimated $40 million in 1986 alone. Oil giants deploy drilling rig advisory systems. Even if accuracy sits at 70%, that's better than wildcatting by gut feel. Insurance companies adopt underwriting rules coded by teams of actuaries. No machine learning involved, just if heritage, then premium. So in a paradoxical twist, expert systems success actually reinforces the idea that symbolic AI is the safe bet, and that neural networks, robotics, and natural language understanding belong in the toy chest. So what do we learn from this deep freeze? First of all, hardware and hype desynchronization. Moore's law doubles transistors every 18 months, but as with today, AI expectations triple every press release. When the exponentials stop overlapping, disillusionment blooms. Then we have the fact that public imagination outruns lab reality. People believe HAL 9000 is months away, while researchers are still debugging punch card overflows. We also find that bad headlines cost decades. One scathing government report can slash budgets worldwide. Alpac and Lighthill still evoke shudders among the gray-bearded old AI veterans out there. And finally, we learn that survival requires rebranding. Neural net gurus rename their work pattern classification. Roboticists call theirs autonomous mobile inspection. They hibernate, but they don't die. Even in the coldest months, a few keep the fire alive. Geoff Hinton starts exploring backpropagation at the University of Edinburgh, often borrowing compute time from acoustic labs. Yann LeCun, who had become one of Geoff's students, at the time a French teenager, wires simple adaptive circuits on his bedroom desk after homework, unaware he'll one day co-author convolutional neural networks. And Carver Mead's VLSI revolution at Caltech hints that neural circuits might run in silicon more efficiently than on general-purpose CPUs. These folks' papers receive scant citations, but they keep publishing, stashing ideas for warmer days. Even as early as the late 1970s, in the grip of the AI winter, two forces hint at spring. Number one is Japan's fifth-generation project, which announces $400 million to build logic programming supercomputers, setting off a geopolitical funding race. And number two, the microprocessor revolution. The Intel 8080 and Motorola 68000 shrink compute into hobbyist kits. Suddenly, AI code can run in garages, not just governmental labs. The public still thinks AI failed, but under the cultural frost, new shoots push up. Rule-based profit, cheaper silicon, stubborn neural net cultists. Our next section celebrates those ideas that refuse to die. Algorithms, languages, and philosophies that hibernate yet sprout whenever the temperature rises. Ready to meet the survivors and preview the next video? Let's take a look. The air is chilly, budgets are thin, and AI has become a four-letter word in grant committees. But ideas are sturdier than line items. Strip away the press releases, and we find half a dozen concepts that simply roll their eyes at the cold, curl into dormancy, and wait for spring. First, we have A-Star. When the Mars Pathfinder mission lifts off in 1996, large parts of NASA's onboard planner are still A-Star derivatives dreamt up for Shaky back in 1968, 30 years earlier. The Martian landscape may be red dust, not linoleum tiles, but an admissible heuristic is eternal. If your phone ever rerouted you around a traffic jam, you used A-Star's great-grandchild. Then there's Lisp. Lisp machines as a business flopped, but the language itself migrates everywhere. Emacs, dubbed the thermonuclear text editor, swallows whole operating system tasks by embedding Lisp. AutoCAD's AutoLisp lets architects script buildings a la Lego. And when Reddit first needed a ranking function, an engineer whipped up a Lispy weighting of upvotes in under an hour. The moral of this, you can bankrupt a workstation company, but you cannot kill parentheses. Next, while neural dreams hibernate, expert systems quietly make money. XCON configures DexVax computers, reducing order errors from 60% to practically zero, worth about $40 million in 1986 alone. Oil giants deploy drilling advisors. If you avoid one dry well, the system's purchase price plus a software engineer's salary looks like pocket change. And credit bureaus embed underwriting shells. 300 rules, half a second, rubber stamp or reject your loan. People announce the AI winter, yet symbolic engines approve billions in mortgages. But rulebooks aren't the only seeds sprouting under the snow. In a few quiet corners of academia, a different tribe is asking, what if intelligence is really about uncertainty? Flashback to 1763, Reverend Thomas Bayes shows how to flip conditional probabilities, P of cause, the probability of a cause given the evidence, by multiplying this likelihood with prior belief and renormalizing. 2 centuries later, AI labs shrug this off as just statistics, yet a handful of rebels keep the faith. 1960s spam filter pioneers at Bell Labs tinker with robust Bayesian word counts long before anyone tweets about phishing. In 1973, Swedish statistician Gunnar Carlsson sketches medical diagnosis trees that choose antibiotics by updating priors with every symptom. And in the late 1970s, a UCLA professor named Judea Pearl starts wiring variables into little circles and arrows, early Bayesian networks that can juggle 1,000 competing hypotheses without blowing core memory. They publish in statistics journals AI conferences barely notice, but the idea, beliefs updated by evidence, refuses to die. Fast forward and you'll see Bayes whispering inside Coleman filters on Apollo guidance computers, steering corrections in self-driving cars, and even fine-tuning the weights of modern diffusion models. We'll unpack these fireworks, the causal graphs, probabilistic robots, and how Bayes nearly dethroned logic in episode 2. For now, just remember, while symbolic rules and frozen budgets dominated the 70s, a quiet mathematical tide was rising, one prior at a time. Then we had the Canadian Mafia. In drafty Toronto offices, Jeff Hinton keeps tinkering with multi-layered perceptrons. He coins the term backpropagation in a 1986 Nature paper co-written with David Rumelhart and Ronald Williams. Citations, a trickle. Believers, a cult. Importance, planet shifting, but nobody knows this yet. Down the hall, Hinton student Yoshua Bengio studies distributed representations. Another graduate student we previously met, Jan LeCun, trades papers with Hinton by airmail from Paris. He introduces convolutions plus weight sharing to recognize handwritten zip codes for the US Postal Service. 30 million letters a day processed by a, quote, dead neural network idea. Over at Caltech, Very Large Scale Integration, or VLSI pioneer Carver Mead argues you should implement neurons directly in silicon transistors. The chips he sketches run 1,000 times faster and only sip energy. He calls the philosophy neuromorphic. Interestingly, Intel will rediscover this term 40 years later. In the 1980s, only a handful of PhD theses gamely followed along. Even as during this time symbolic logic reigns, a maverick thread of AI says, maybe reasoning is really probability. Judea Pearl builds Bayesian networks to diagnose car faults. Statisticians clap, mainstream AI yawns, but Pearl's math will become the skeleton of self-driving car sensor fusion and medical causal modeling decades on. Finally, silicon itself refuses to stay frozen. While AI budgets slump, Moore's law keeps doubling transistor counts every 18 months. By 1979, the Motorola 68000 squeezes 40,000 transistors onto one chip, enough to stuff a baby Lisp interpreter plus a crude neural network into a beige desktop. Hobby clubs like the Homebrew Computer Club that would birth Apple Computer chat about chess endgames between solder fumes. The next thaw is coming. You can taste it in the barium titanate dust of every new DRAM wafer. These survivors, heuristics, Lisp, expert rules, backprop preprints, Bayesian whispers, and ever cheaper silicon constitute AI's underground root system. Cut the budgetary treetops and the roots thicken in darkness, ready to explode upward when the first warm rain of new funding falls. Fast forward to 2025 and the headlines feel strangely familiar. Only swap instant Russian translation for godlike text generators and robot valet. So are we barreling towards AI Winter 3.0, or is this time different? Here's the short answer I give at dinner parties. Same psychology, different physics. Yep, the hype cycle still outruns reality, that's just human nature. But unlike the 1970s, we have 3 stabilizers Dartmouth could only dream about. Number 1 is cloud clusters that scale by credit card, not congressional vote. Number 2, and probably most important, is data. Terabytes, petabytes of it, flowing from every phone sensor and every clickstream. And 3, we have revenue engines. Search ads, recommendation feeds, code copilots, products that throw off cash even when the science stalls. Does this mean no future AI winter? Well, in the summer of 2022, I rather embarrassingly did a video claiming the next AI winter was just around the corner, but in November ChatGPT was released and things kinda went supernova instead. So a bit more chastened this time, I'll now say that maybe this time around we won't get a deep freeze, but history says we'll still cycle through some cooler times. One could even argue that we just came out of one of those cooler times or are currently in a cooler period waiting for things to thaw out again. Here's the important thing to remember. Technology improves steadily. Expectations improve exponentially. Keep that ratio in mind and you won't need a parka or pom-poms every time the hype meter swings. By New Year's Day 1980, the scene looks paradoxical. On the one hand, news magazines still speak of AI's broken promises, but on the other hand, companies quietly bank expert system profits. Japanese ministries pledge $400 million for a fifth-generation computer project, and home computers pop up in suburban bedrooms running tiny basic chatbots that spout haiku. Three trajectories now speed towards collision. First is the expert system boom. Corporations discover that every rule of thumb runnable on a VAX can shave dollars off overhead. Knowledge engineers, white lab coat librarians of logic, become tech's hottest hire. Two is the neuromorphic underground. Hinton, LeCun, Bengio, and others accumulate tricks, convolutions, Boltzmann machines, momentum, weight decay, waiting for a GPU good enough to ignite them. And three, the personal computer wildcard. The Apple II, Commodore 64, and IBM PC sprinkled cheap processors like dandelion seeds. Suddenly, AI is not just a DARPA pastime, it's something a 14-year-old can hack after doing algebra homework. And we have one last very important ingredient: fear of geopolitical embarrassment. When Japan's fifth-gen project threatens Western dominance, US and European agencies reopen the funding taps. Dollars and Deutschmarks flow back, first through symbolic channels, then, once GPUs appear through gaming, into deep nets. Those are streams from the river we're going to ride in part 2. So stay tuned, AI Spring number 2 is about to get rowdy. So this is a very different video than my usual. Please let me know in the comments what you think about it, and please do me 3 quick favors. Number 1, please hit like. It nudges YouTube's recommendation net, yes, another AI, to share this history lesson. Number 2, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss part 2, where we chase 80s boom and bust cycles, Japanese logic machines, and the start of the deep learning resurrection. And number 3, if you're in contact from any of the players from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, please do put them in contact with me. The folks in this part of the history are mostly unfortunately passed away at this point, but the folks from the 80s and beyond are very much still with us, and I would love to chat with them as part of my research for this next episode, so please do put me in contact if you know them. And finally, drop a comment. Which survivor fascinated you the most? The unstoppable Lisp parentheses, yeah, they are pretty much unstoppable, Hinton's backprop crusade, or Bayes quietly plotting in the background? I'll read your comments, and your insights shape future episodes. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep those cores cool and your optimism warmer, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.